Hello, Podcast Village. Thanks for joining us for the first episode of Colorblind, Race Across Generations. I'm your host, Vanessa Echols, television journalist here in the state of Florida, by trade, talker by birth, along with my super producer, Keith, who's laughing when I said...
Just a little bit.
Talker by birth. I have a lot to say.
Just a little.
We're here for an honest, bold, candid, intelligent conversation about race. You know, the kind of conversation where you actually listen without yelling and screaming and judging other folks. So what's different? Well, we're looking at race through the lens of different races and generations, from baby boomers to millennials. For our first discussion, we have a baby boomer, Rick Brunson, a college professor and writer, and two millennials, Ashley Long, a young professional, and Crystal Farai, a student and community activist. Keith, they were very interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
A white man, a young African-American woman, and a biracial woman.
They all go into a bar and then...
That's what it sounds like, doesn't it? The start of a bad joke. All right, so let's get right to the conversation. And my first question that's really at the heart of this podcast: why is it so hard to talk about race? Keith, there were a few crickets for a few seconds there, waiting to see who would tackle that question first.
Yeah, and I think it was Rick that started it off, too. So.
I think he did.
Yeah, go figure.
All right, so let's listen. So welcome to the Podcast Village, all of our listeners. Welcome to the podcast panel. Thanks for joining us here for our first episode, where we're going to talk about race candidly, ask all the questions that maybe we've been afraid to ask, but we're not going to yell at each other. We're going to have an open mind. That's the goal. We have people from different racial, ethnic backgrounds. We also have people from different generations. That's one of the points of this. We have baby boomers. We have millennials. So this should be very interesting. So let's dive deep right in there. We're talking about race. Why is it hard for us to talk about the elephant in the room, race? It's a part of who we are, everything we do see in society. How come we don't like to talk about it? Crystal, I see you looking at me, so we'll start with you.
Okay, sounds good. I think my go-to is that a lot of people, I think when they hear the word race, they think of racism. So that's obviously a pretty tough topic to talk about at times, or depending on who you're with. So I think that it's just difficult because people don't want to get into that conversation. They don't want to get into, well, I don't want to be assumed I'm racist, or, you know, things like that. And I think a lot of time when we think about race, we think about black and white and just the issues that our country, you know, has faced since its beginning between those races. And I mean, there's so many more, but it's a touchy subject, it seems like. And I think people don't want to assume what other people are, especially now in our generation. But I don't know, I hope that makes sense. That I just think of that, you know, racism just comes to people's mind when they hear the word race.
Exactly, and when I've talked to some people about the podcast, I've always said, you know, they can be two separate things, racism and the issue of race. Now, maybe they intersect or intertwine, but they really are two different things. Rick the baby boomer. So why is it so difficult to talk about race?
I think people are fearful that if they wade into the conversation, they might be tainted, or they may say something wrong. Maybe they don't want to offend. So they just retreat to a space of comfort,
which is often not saying anything.
Which is not saying anything, and so so opportunity gets missed, you know, because people are fearful and scared of saying the wrong thing or being perceived the wrong way, and it may not turn out so well, you know. So we don't have those conversations that we need to have.
Ashley?
Yeah, I agree with what both Crystal and Rick have said, that it can be touchy, because definitely when I think of race, racism really is the first thing that comes to mind. I don't really know what else I feel like I need to discuss besides the fact that I feel like, you know, it can be a divisive topic if we get into the issue of racism. And like Crystal said, it also really depends on, I think, who you're around and what particular group you may be associated with at that time. I think it's more easy to talk about in your social circles personally versus a work setting or school or anything like that, where something you say can be misconstrued. And especially with the social media age, I just feel like people are even a little bit more hesitant because you could say something and then it's viral, or it's never going to die because somebody's going to post about it, or, you know, it just becomes something that you kind of possibly shy away from, which is, you know, definitely a hindrance to possibly having really in-depth discussions that may be helpful. So,
And I think it does matter, like, the people that you're around, because you know that with some people you can say something or ask a question, but if someone doesn't know you and they hear you ask that, it's like, wait just a
yeah,
minute.
you get offended
What she mean by
versus
that kind
a
of thing?
safe space.
Right.
Yeah.
So is it an issue of creating a safe space, or do you just boldly sometimes step out there and ask a question or say something or initiate a discussion? Because that's a tough one if you're out of the safe space. What do you think? Can you be that bold or not?
I think it depends on your personality. I've definitely have said things myself, and then in my mind I'm like, oh my God, why did I just ask that? And then I've seen my boyfriend present things to my family, and you know, my family and I, we don't always have the same views on things. And I've, just to be honest, my boyfriend, who is white, has asked my brother-in-law, who's also white, hey, what do you think about white privilege? And I remember being in that room and thinking, oh my,
Well, that must have been crickets.
right.
Uncomfortable silence.
Right. And, you know, I noticed it was mostly from me, though, I think, because I was scared. Okay, what's going to happen right now? You know, is someone going to be offended? What are they going to say? Where is it going to go on from here? And it ended up being just a conversation about white privilege. It went fine. But I think the fear is it's not going to go that way.
Well, I think you both, Ashley and Crystal, raise a really interesting point in that depending on the group of people you're with, conversations about race happen. When white people get together, they have conversations about race. When black people get together, those conversations happen, but they need to happen with each other and across those racial differences. So, yeah, I mean, when you're home with your family, and if your family's all white, there's conversations about race, and most likely true, you know, if you're African American, they happen, but they're not happening in the places and the spaces where they need to happen to be constructive and move us ahead.
And so how can we do that? I mean, can you just come into work tomorrow and say, you know what, everybody, I think today needs to be Conversations About Race Day.
Well, I'm a professor, so I look for provocative moments. I mean,
Your classroom is a safe space to a certain extent.
I'm always looking for opportunities to bring up, because race is a component on just about every issue that in this country, whether it's economics or political or whatever, religion. I mean, you name the topic, there's a racial component to it that we need to be talking about. So I look for opportunities, whether it's with family or in a classroom space, to bring it up because it's healthy and we need to have the conversation. And I think the more you talk about it, the more people will be comfortable to talk about it more, and that will be a good thing. You know,
So how difficult is it to talk about it and to hear someone whose views you think are just totally the opposite of yours without yelling or screaming or thinking or saying, you, sir, are an idiot, or you, ma'am, are as dumb as a rock? I mean, how do you just listen with an open mind and then say something that maybe helps to educate them, or you have a discussion about, hey, I feel this way, you feel that way? How do we meet the common ground, come to the common ground?
I think with the issue of race, you're dealing with two things. You're dealing with ignorance and you're dealing with hatred. And that's two sides of the same coin. You know, when we're dealing with, you know, attitudes about race that are coming from a place maybe of ignorance, there's an opportunity to educate without trying to ask questions to help them see or help someone see from a different perspective. So there's the educational part of it. You know, when it's coming from a place of hatred, that takes sometimes a different approach. We have to confront it, right, and address it, and that it's not acceptable. With the overall understanding, I think we want this to be redemptive, right? I mean, for us to move together as an American society, everybody has to be on board. We have to move forward together, and that's going to mean educating each other, helping each other understand. But where we see racism coming from a vicious place, which we have seen very much so in the last year, we have to confront it and recognize it and call it what it is, and try to still have that conversation. But we have to come from a place of justice, and this is not right. This, there is right and wrong, and we need to be on the right side of this. And when it's language and rhetoric that leads to violence, we have to stand against it very firmly in a united front, I think.
I have to say that this particular question is something that I personally can say that I struggle with. The
Why?
whole idea of being confronted with people who have opposition to me simply because of the color of my skin, especially with the history of racism and things in this country, has been something that I truly do struggle with, which is, I think, one of the reasons why I and probably some other Black people have chosen in certain situations to not have those type of dialogues, because you do get angry. They're angry, and it makes you very, very angry, because it's like Rick was kind of saying, it's coming from a place of hatred and ignorance, and it's something that I personally can't really comprehend. So I can say that, as I've gotten older, I think it's been a little bit more helpful for me to learn to try to understand where those ideologies and where those thoughts are coming from. The fact that people and racism is a product of your environment and kind of your family and things that you were raised in helps me to understand a little bit more, not to just immediately get, rah-rah. I'm upset in this very moment. I'm going to try to, but also definitely education, because I know for me personally, just as a Black person in America, I grew up in schools not really having the fundamental education or instruction to understand everything and the reasons why racism existed and the reasons why, these things continue to be an issue today. So I think that if everybody kind of made strides to learn more, to educate themselves about history and about, systematic and structural racism, all these things would help in these conversations that we could have in a safe space and an open environment. And I think maybe in certain situations like this, it would be helpful to feel like you are in a space of control, so that if something were to get out of hand, you don't feel endangered,
Right.
Because if I go and I try to just have a dialogue with a white person, I don't know if maybe my safety is going to be, in jeopardy if I were to try to say something to them, and that could offend them, So I think that also may be helpful to feel like you're in a, safe space thing, but also that you have some semblance of control in an environment where you would bring up something like this.
And I think what Rick mentioned is very important, because sometimes people will ask a question and it's out of ignorance, not necessarily racism. So I think you also have to have an open mind of, okay, this person thinks that because maybe they've never met any Black people, which is kind of like, you never met Black people in your life. But, if there's some people out there who've never met anyone, or not necessarily even Black people, it could be someone who is Hispanic, it could be someone who is Asian, whatever. They may be asking a question just out of a place of I don't know or I don't understand. And so not every question being asked is coming from a place of racism.
Right.
And that's what I think we have to get to the point where we can be open-minded enough to, before we speak, like, okay, let me try to figure out where this person is coming from.
You want a good baby boomer story? You got me on the panel for a baby boomer
Yes.
story. So
Go for it.
1963, I was 2 years old, and my dad was stationed at the Pentagon up in Washington, D.C., and so you think 1963, watershed, pivotal year in our nation's history.
Absolutely.
Dr. King's speech, I Have a Dream speech on Washington Mall. JFK was assassinated in that November. So my parents took me to the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier at Arlington National Cemetery. I'm 2 years old, just beginning to learn to talk. And if you've ever been to the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, it is a solemn stately,
Absolutely.
high moment in the life of our nation. And the way that my parents relate the story, because I was too at the time, was that the honor guard who was there at the changing of the guard was African American. And these guys who were on, they snap their heels. They are sharp. They have razor sharp creases in their. And I mean, they handle that weapon with just precision. And my mom said that I blurted out, "Mama, look, it's a Negro man."
Oh boy.
Okay, a Negro man. Well, the nomenclature of the time was that African Americans were called Negroes. So even at the age of 2, I was already aware of racial difference. Okay, at the age of 2, the honor guard wheeled around, snapped his heels, came over. There were a whole bunch of people watching this and said, "Parents, please refrain your children from using profanity in the presence of the tomb of the unknown soldier." And everybody was kind of looking around like, well, who cursed? Who cussed? What he heard as the N-word out of the mouth of a 2-year-old who was trying to say Negro created a moment and a thing at the most solemn, holiest place, secularly speaking, in our nation in 1963. So that moment taught me a lot in growing up, that we have racial awareness at a very young age, and it's freighted with meaning. It comes with baggage that we spend the rest of our lives trying to sort out and work out. And what the other person hears and what one person is saying or communicating doesn't always translate, and that's where misunderstanding can happen. So, we have to use our words carefully, but understand this is part of who we are. I mean, I really appreciate what Ashley had to say about history. We all need a shared set of facts about our nation's history and understanding that we were founded upon conflicting ideas of slavery and freedom, and they grew up together, and they meant different things depending on what side of that racial divide you were on. And it has brought with it, to the year that we're in and the circumstances that we're in, all kind of baggage that we have a lot of work left to do to unpack.
So, just out of curiosity, what was your parents' reaction when you caused this great controversy?
Well, they
at the
were
age of
looking.
2?
They were looking around. Well, like who uttered a profanity, and it did not occur to them that the word that I said was interpreted by someone else of another race as offensive, and so we left. Or I'm told, I was too, very disconcerted that somehow they had created a problem at Arlington National Cemetery, and they were kind of befuddled by what it all meant. And
But there wasn't a conversation in that
there
setting.
wasn't a conversation in that setting like there needed to be.
It just makes me think of what Ashley was saying, like when we hear someone's story, because I think that's what helps me get through some of these conversations, is when I know where someone came from. Like, a lot of us are a product of our environment, so perhaps using that word was a product of your environment, So I think not that I don't necessarily want to say it justifies racism or ignorance or anything, but I think for me it helps me to understand a little bit more where they're coming from, and then I could at least pause, breathe, and say, okay, well, this is my story, though. This is how I'm seeing it.
It's what you said, though. In order to understand, you have to take a breath and pause. You have to listen with an open mind and an open heart, but with an open mind to hear someone else's story. So if there is a takeaway on this part of the conversation, then, people listening, what can we do to start the conversation? That's a tough one.
Jimmy Carter used to say that racism and hatred are kind of like cancer. You may not know that you have it, right, until you're diagnosed. And some kind of diagnostic test reveals that you have this problem. And then you have to decide whether you're going to be in denial about it or whether you're going to get it treated, right? So, and it may be an interaction with somebody, it may be a confrontation with someone, it may be some kind of social situation where you realize, boy, they took this one way, I meant it a different way, but there's something in me that I don't understand that I need to learn. And that's where those conversations can be helpful. Knowledge doesn't happen without a little humility first. So, knowing what you don't know is part of the cure.
And looking for those moments.
Yeah.
They're all around us. Yeah. We probably go through the day and there are moments that we could stop and pause and have that discussion. Maybe it does involve getting out of the safe space.
I was going to say people have to be willing to be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I heard a quote recently, comfort is the enemy of progress. And
wow.
I think that's so true as far as everything. I mean, in our daily lives, I think people tend to do what, keeps them the most, in their space, what their norm is, whether that's, here at work, even in your personal life, there be certain things that you don't confront because it's not comfortable. And race is definitely an uncomfortable topic in America. So I think if people are willing to kind of take that step, then it'll probably be a great thing for everybody.
That's a great challenge to everyone in the podcast village.
Yeah.
So before we move into our next subject, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Hello, producer Keith.
Hello, that's me.
That's original. Guess what?
I thought about that for 2 seconds.
I'm sure you did. Hey, guess what? We have a sponsor for our first podcast.
Oh, so we're gonna get money?
You get nothing.
Okay.
But listen to this.
Okay.
If you're looking for a sweet way to jumpstart or rebrand your business, look no further than Slice of Pie Media. From website design to brand development, Slice of Pie's creative bakers, get it? Select bakers provide only the highest level of quality branding to make sure your business stands out. So, whether you have a new or established business and are looking for quality branding and design, look no further than Slice of Pie Media. To get started, visit sliceofpiemedia.com today. Welcome back. Welcome back to the panel. Welcome back to the podcast village. We've talked about why talking about race is so uncomfortable, why we don't talk about it, because it is uncomfortable or we're afraid to make people angry or all those different things. So let's talk about racial identity, who we are, how we identify ourselves. Rick, you and I probably both remember the time where there were two races that we saw. You were either black or white, and there was nothing in between. So you had to pick a side. For some of us, the side was obvious, and for others of us, not so much. So, Crystal, you have a very interesting story to share. And I think when we see you, we see a white woman, or we might say, well, she might be Hispanic, she might be Puerto Rican, she might be Cuban, and she's probably white. So this is like first grade. What are you?
Good question. I bet no one can guess. No one has ever guessed. Does anyone want to guess?
Are you? Is it two different mixes?
I am biracial. Yes.
Okay. So I was about to say I kind of cheated because I feel like I already knew that because of something that I saw on like notes or something. I feel like I already knew that. So
okay, but what? What would you guess?
I feel like you definitely have black. And I don't know, maybe black and white.
It's like going through the color palette.
Okay.
You have a little bit of orange.
I know, because I'm just
and
like, I just feel like it definitely has to be. I feel like it's definitely some black, but I don't know for sure.
And Rick, what would you say?
Some Arab Hasidic background.
And you think
Hasidic.
that because
Just the shape of her face and her almond eyes.
Okay.
She's beautiful. And you know your hair. So
Okay, so Crystal, the big reveal. What are you?
Okay, so I am half white and half Guyanese.
Oh, wow. I was way off.
Everyone should see their faces right now.
I was way off.
I've gotten all of those guesses.
bet.
It's most often white in Spanish, but then I've gotten both of those guesses as well.
So you identify yourself as biracial. So this was not always the case, though.
Right.
So how did you come to this point in your life?
Yeah, so growing up, I did always say I'm half white and I'm half Guyanese. And everyone was like, Guyanese, what is that, Chinese? And I'm like, no, it's West Indian, and no one ever knew, where it was. But it wasn't really until my younger 20s, a few years ago, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 years ago now, where I started to have conversations about race. I was working with the Peace and Justice Institute, an organization in Orlando that comes out of Valencia College. And we started having conversations about race. And we brought in Dr. Peggy McIntosh, who has written and worked extensively on white privilege, diversity, race, and her most famous paper is probably Unpacking the Knapsack of White Privilege. She came to the college a couple times, and I remember just sitting in one of her sessions thinking, well, I'm white, but I'm also Guyanese, but I've grown up checking white. I grew up with my sisters who are also, white Guyanese, and then my mother who is white. We didn't grow up with our birth father. We were around our Guyanese family. But I just remember sitting in that session thinking, why do I check white though? And it's weird, it's hard for me to explain, but something felt off. And like I wasn't maybe authentic in who I was or who I was identifying as racially. And so after one of the sessions, I shared this with you, Vanessa, I went up to Peggy and I was like, Peggy, I don't know, I'm white and I'm Guyanese, but I've always checked white and I just feel really weird and I don't know what to do. I don't know what I really need, if I need anything, but I was just so confused. And Peggy looked at me and she was like, well, you're not white, you're biracial. And for me, it's at least the first time I can ever remember that anyone has called me biracial. I never really referred to myself that way. And I think for some, that's not really a big deal, but for me, it kind of was. And I don't know exactly why, but just something clicked. And I was like, yeah, I'm biracial. But I didn't really know what that meant. And she told me, you need to live the next 6 months as a biracial person. And I remember feeling so excited. I was like, oh, yeah, I'm going to live.
What does that mean?
Right. Well, it's interesting because I was so excited. And I got in my car and I went home. And then on the way home, I was like, wait a minute, I don't even know what she means.
Yeah.
Why was I excited? Because I have no idea what I'm supposed to do right now. And I still don't fully know what she meant. I don't know why I never called her or emailed her to ask, but
maybe she'll be listening to the podcast and
maybe
she
that would
can
be
enlighten
awesome. Hi, Peggy. But I know one step I made was I don't check white anymore, and I do if I'm talking about my race, I say that I'm biracial. I literally will check other and write in half white or Caucasian, half Guyanese. And it's still kind of weird. I don't know, but I think that I would see like my Guyanese family, my cousins. I have a lot of cousins on that side. And most of them grew up with their Guyanese parents. So I think I just saw them as more Guyanese than me. And I almost felt like a fraud. And it's weird. It's nothing no one did to me. I'm so happy I grew up with my mom. And I've had the best life I can, And I think, though, something just felt off for me. And I think it's a little weird for my family to hear me say I'm biracial. I don't know why. And it's okay. But it does feel like there's some discomfort there. And I think I even hold it still. When I say I'm biracial, I think in me I'm like, oh, I just said that.
Is it both sides of your family you feel uncomfortable when you say?
Because I don't have a big connection to the Guyanese side of my family.
So the white side of your
right,
family.
Yeah. And maybe they don't. I love them so much, and they support everything I do. So it's not like it's a problem that I identify as being biracial, but
So, talking about your family, did you come home one day and just announce, like I have an announcement, everyone, I am biracial?
No, I wish it was that easy, kind of. But I think we had a lot of different, like, gradual conversations about it. I think I did that with my boyfriend, though. I was like, hey, Evan, I'm biracial. And
I have news for you today.
And he was like, yeah, you are. Like, he already acknowledged that. And he's so supportive of me, so he was happy for me, but he was kind of like, yeah, I've known this. But with my family, I've asked my sisters here and there, like, what do you think? Like, do you like, I don't know if I've worded it this way, but do you like being white and Guyanese? Do you embrace, like, both of that? Do you embrace that we're biracial? I think, I don't want to assume this, but I think the term biracial is weird for them. Sorry, family, if I'm wrong, but I don't know. It just seems that way, and it's not like they have a problem with me identifying that way, but I think we just see it a little differently.
And Rick, I can see the wheels turning because you had a question.
Yeah. So how, when this moment of discovery for you happened, how did it make you feel as a person? What did it do for you in the way you looked at yourself and how you feel about yourself when you began to? It was like a light went on for you, right? Yeah.
Yes. Light bulb totally went off. I don't know fully why. I think I'm still on that, journey and exploration. But I think it just made me feel whole, and like this is something that's always been a part of me, but I was fully embracing it, and it just felt right, kind of, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And what comes with that in terms of your well-being and your
Exactly.
sense of yourself?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you feel like you're at peace, like, oh, I know who I am a biracial woman. And so have you figured out what it's like to live as a biracial woman, or are you just being you?
I'm just being me, I think. I don't know. And it's funny you asked that, because I kind of ask myself those questions. Like, okay, wait, well, is anything different because I am, like, I'm fully biracial now, according to my mind, like, I don't know. I think that, if this makes sense, I don't know that this is, like, the proper way to word this, but I think I still will always carry a lot of white privilege. It's something I have anyway, but I don't know that I'm ever gonna, find that person who's like, hey, you're white and Guyanese, I think I'm always gonna be assumed as white or Spanish.
It's a process,
Yeah,
though.
it's
This whole
totally a process.
embracing who you are.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
accepting who you are and
Yeah.
reveling in it.
Right.
It's all a process.
Right, just like any other aspect of our life, whether it's race, gender, religion, anything like that. I think a lot of it, for a lot of people, or at least me, it's a process.
So it's so interesting to hear your story, because as a person who's grown up, I have, from the time I knew here are black people and white people, I could look at myself in the mirror and say, I am a black woman. I still am, still always will be, even though I did ancestry DNA. Like, I just mailed it off, so I'm very curious as to what it comes back to tell me.
I really want to do that.
I might be something else. But I didn't have that struggle of, what am I? So when you hear that, what are your thoughts? And I'll turn to your fellow millennial, Ashley, when you hear that.
About the
What are you
seeking
thinking?
to identify yourself. I mean, I just think it's, I said this a minute ago, that I just think it's really exciting that you have been able to discover this part of yourself that you didn't know existed, and that you're embracing it in a way that's making you feel more fulfilled and happy. Especially because, I think people can point to many different aspects of their lives as they grow, and it helps you to, feel like you're becoming your most authentic self. And that's always a really exciting thing. I, like you, have always known that I am considered to be a black woman living in America. I grew up with, both parents being identified that way, grandparents being identified that way. So it was never a struggle for me to think, who am I really, or possibly discovering. But that ancestry DNA, like you said, if it comes back and tells me, hey, you're this, and that.
Something else.
Right.
Yeah, but the only thing I can say about being Black, though, that I do think I can kind of identify with as far as wondering is the fact that I don't know exactly my roots. I can say, yes, I'm Black, but what does being Black really mean? I feel like you've always been kind of told what your culture is and what that's supposed to mean for you, but what part of, if I am, my ancestors are most likely coming from Africa, what part of Africa?
Exactly.
What did that mean? What language did they speak? What cultural aspects of my identity should come with that? That's something that I think I really would still like to know, that I think would help me to feel whole as well, as far as like racial identity. So
That's very important, because I would like to know, like, am I a descendant of an African princess?
Right.
Which is, I think, most likely.
you definitely have
what?
the regality.
I mean,
for
that's
sure.
in my mind. It's like, yes, descendant of an African princess. No, it's curiosity, but it's also just a part of, oh, that's who I am.
Yeah,
Or that's why I
exactly.
am what I am.
Yeah.
So, Rick, you probably never had this struggle because you are a white man.
Yes, I am.
Stating the obvious. So
Yes, I
when
am.
you hear Crystal's story, what are your thoughts?
What intrigued me was,
Can I say one thing, not to cut you off,
Yes.
though?
No, please.
When I saw your picture, I didn't think you were white at first.
oh no, Kim.
I didn't either.
I thought that you were a
did you
very
think?
fair-skinned, either biracial or mixed-race person. I really did.
You need to do ancestry DNA.
Funny you say that. My mother just did, and so for her, from her side of my ancestry, I have a pretty good idea of where I come from.
And?
They're at the bottom. So northwestern Europe, British, Irish, French, but they're at the bottom. There is some sub-Saharan Africa. Down there, so
For
you know,
everyone.
For everyone, yeah. So, it was. I'm one of my degrees is in history. So as part of that, I've done some research into my own family background. So no surprises there. I think when you were talking about your own family situation and how you had come to identify yourself as biracial, I think something that you said that was interesting is some of the folks who were troubled by it were like the white side of your family, and I think that speaks to a lot of white people, when they think of race, they don't think of white. They think that
It's everybody else.
It's everybody else, and I think it's helpful and instructive for white people to realize and understand, what being white means, and the whole assignment of benefits and other things that are accrued to you automatically at birth just because you happen to be white, and what that means, and not to feel guilty about it, but to understand what comes with that, and what that means for other people who are not, for whom it did not come with that. And then understanding and going back through, I think history is, as Ashley said, is so important for us to go back and look at the hard facts of history. It doesn't diminish us, not one
In
whit
any
or
way.
bit, in any way, to understand that in all of its complexity and in all of its ugliness, and in moments all of its glory. I mean, one of the most influential books in my education has been Charles Joyner's Down by the Riverside, a South Carolina slave community. I'm originally from South Carolina, so it has a lot of resonance for me because it's from part of the country that I'm from. But just what Black people had to do to forge a sense of community and culture of their own making, while at the same time experiencing the full weight of oppression, makes you understand a little bit more about how that carries forward into all kinds of areas of American culture and society. So to understand Black history, or to attempt to understand Black history is to understand American history, is to understand the American story
Exactly.
and a piece of the American story. And you don't have a full understanding as you can. If you don't, avail yourself to that and look at it with an open eye and critically, and how that informs who you are in this day and age as a white person. So
You've raised some issues that could be, a 10-part series for a podcast. But on the issue of racial identity, what would you say to those who are like, what's the big deal? Why do you have to pick a side? Why can't you just be white? Why can't you just be Black? And why can't you just be Hispanic? Why do you have to be like, well, I'm half Puerto Rican, I'm half, French, why is it a big deal? Why is it important?
the central question of existence is who am
Who
I?
am I?
Who
Exactly.
am I? And,
Right.
and so if you don't have complete answers to that question or just only partial answer, there's a part of you that's missing. So
I think that's what happened to me. Yeah. 'Cause
You always
it's
felt
sort-
that even though you couldn't identify what it was.
Yeah, and I don't think I always felt it. It was really though when I started having conversations about race, I started feeling it almost immediately. Yeah,
And it
it's
has-
who are we?
And it has been a part of culture since, I guess, the beginning of time. Someone mentioned, I think you mentioned something about sub-Saharan Africa. Have you heard of the one-drop rule? We know what that is?
Yeah.
So interesting when you look at that, that for a while it was, if there's that one drop, then you are Black. I don't care how you look.
Right.
You are Black. Which also led to another issue of passing. And Ashley, you mentioned that, just historically the people who would try to perhaps escape oppression or, boy, I'm going to have a hard time being Black. Let me just try this. I don't look Black, so let me just say I'm white and see how that works out for me.
Yeah, when I brought up the story of the white woman who found out her mother was actually biracial, but her whole life had been passing as a white woman. I think it's fascinating because actually on my father's side of my family, I had my grandmother's parents who were so fair-skinned that they could have passed for white. So I know that there were definitely privileges and benefits that came with that they may have taken advantage of at the time. Again, I don't know a whole lot about my ancestry or family heritage to that extent where I can really delve into it, but I definitely think that it's an interesting thought that, some people will reject their actual racial identity in order to assimilate and in order to have an easier life due to the privileges afforded to them for that. So
Okay, when we come back, we have our video of the week or picture of the week. I think this is video, and you won't be able to see it for the podcast village, but you will hear it, and we'll have that discussion when we come back.
As I said before, in case you didn't hear me the first time, we have a sponsor for our very first podcast.
What?
Ooh, so excited.
What?
What I just said. We have a sponsor. If you're looking for a sweet way to jumpstart or rebrand your business, look no further than Slice of Pie Media.
Okay, now that joke makes sense.
That's why I said sweet. From web design to brand development, Slice of Pie's creative bakers provide only the highest level of quality branding to make sure your business stands out. I love them because they rebranded the website for my breast cancer charity, Compassionate Hands and Hearts Breast Cancer Outreach. It is beautiful. People always talk about it. I, of course, take credit for it and say I did that all by myself. But no, really, it was Slice of Pie Media. So if you're looking for quality branding and design, again, look no further than Slice of Pie Media. Visit sliceofpiemedia.com today.
Can we put a plug inside the plug and say your breast cancer charity one more time?
Compassionate Hands and Hearts Breast Cancer Outreach.
That was so organic.
Please.
No problem, Mr. President.
You been following us? Crowd spike after Kendrick Lamar retweeted Steve.
Brave kid.
I've seen one black person in Vermont, and he's on TV.
You've been counting black people?
All black people count. We like to know if people start getting frisky with hoods and tiki torches. We have someone on the team close by.
Nice.
So this is from the hit ABC show Scandal. So the discussion is you go to a place and you count black people. And someone said to me after this particular episode, is that really true when you go places? You count black people? And I'm like, yeah. Sometimes I walk into places and I look around and I'm like, oh, I'm not the only one. Or, oh, there are 3 people who look like me. Do you do that, Ashley?
Yes. I feel like we had this conversation before. We may have. Yeah, I think it's subconscious at this point. So it's funny. I haven't had anybody ask me that ever, who is not black, because it's like, we know. But yeah, I mean, I think, like he said, I think it primarily probably comes out of safety. This idea that if something were to happen, do I have anybody else here who may be willing to, go to bat for me or help me in some sense. But I also think too, it is at this point in time also just a form of commonality, and am I in an environment where there's nobody else who can relate to me, look like me, sound like me, all of those things.
So do you think it was something that was ever taught, or do we just do it? I don't know. I don't think my parents ever said to me, okay, when you go to certain places, you should count the number of black people. I don't know when I started doing it, and I don't know why I still do it, but I do.
Yeah, I don't recall it ever being a discussion either. I feel like it must have been something passed down
through the generations.
that is just became a subconscious. Like
we are.
This is what you do. I also think because I feel like a lot of times we are thrust into many environments where we are the only black person, and it makes us always very conscious and cognizant of the fact that we are black, versus I feel like there's a lot of white people who never have to be in environments where they are the only white person, so they don't feel that same sense of being out of place in a certain extent. So I think it comes from that too, again, from this idea of I'm alone, I don't have anybody who looks like me, is like me, acts like me, all those things, and it just happens when you're in these environments.
And so, Crystal, you are not biracial, Crystal. You are just nodding away.
Yes. It's something I do too. I count how many non-white people are in a room, at least who appear to be, non-white, because we might not know for sure. And it's so interesting to hear this. I'm glad I heard this. I never actually had seen it as like a safety thing. I've always thought of it as like an inclusivity thing. Like, okay, so I'm technically like the only biracial person here, and I do it in my neighborhood, even like where I live. And I saw just weeks ago a black woman walking a dog, and I was like, oh my God, where does she live? I've never seen her before. But yeah, I do count how many non-white people are around.
And so, Rick, as a Caucasian man, when you heard that, are you like, oh, or do you do that too?
It makes perfect sense to me. If I were black or brown or Latino, it makes perfect sense that you would immediately scope the room and see who here is like me. The safety part of it was kind of interesting that I had not thought of before. That there was safety in that it being who's got my back here, right? So that was a kind of an interesting wrinkle for me to hear.
So Ashley said that rarely are white people put into situations where they're the only white person there. But you had one recently when you went to church in, was it Georgia or South Carolina?
It was in Savannah. Yeah, Savannah, Georgia, yes.
So you're just roaming the streets of Savannah. You hear some music.
And was drawn right in. And it was an African-American church. I believe it was an AME denominational church, and I was just drawn by the music. I was walking on the street with my family, and they were practicing on a Saturday for their next day's worship service, and the music was just captivating. And I slipped into the back of the auditorium kind of unobtrusively. I didn't want to interrupt what they were doing, and just kind of took it all in, and very welcoming, everyone, come on in, I felt right at home.
Because you stuck out because you were only white guy there.
Only white guy there, but...
I don't mean you stuck out like in a bad way, I'm just saying.
No, but they everybody there made me feel right at home. They didn't like, why is this guy, in our church, very welcoming and got smiles. But leaving, Savannah's right up the street geographically from Charleston. We all know what happened in Charleston.
Yeah.
As I left, I kind of had a twinge of, I could have made them very uncomfortable, some strange, middle-aged white guy slipping into their church. Somebody else did that in Charleston, and we had a national tragedy happen. So I kind of had like second thought. Like I went in because I was drawn to the music and for positive reasons. I hope it didn't make them uncomfortable because of the context of what happened in Charleston. They certainly didn't make me feel that way, but I kind of felt like you might have wanted to be a little bit more careful because I might have made them feel uncomfortable, or like, why is this guy here? Is he carrying a gun? Because of what happened. And
interesting that you even had that thought, that you even had that awareness that could have been the case.
Yeah, so it was a little ambivalent leaving. The music was joyful.
And you had a good time.
And I had a good time while I was there. And everybody made me feel at home, made me feel perfectly at home. But walking out, I kind of had that second thought. Like, was that really for them and for their sake, was that maybe the best thing to do?
We have had an awesome discussion about the issue of race. We cannot, of course, solve everything related to it in a couple of hours or 30 minutes or 45 minutes, but I think we did something very important, and we started the conversation. So as we close, each week I will ask our guests to fill in the blank. When it comes to race, I admit... We'll start with you, Crystal. When it comes to race, I admit...
When it comes to race, I admit that I'm not as well versed as I'd like to be. I want to be a person who, like, especially in those difficult conversations that we talked about, I want to be able to, I don't know, like, even just be able to list statistics and facts and stories, and I can do a little bit of that, but I want to do that more. I think what, Ashley was saying earlier, like educating ourselves is so important. So I admit that I haven't educated myself as much as I want to, and I think that I need to.
Rick, when it comes to race, I admit...
I have blind spots. So just as you get into a car, you adjust your mirrors so that you take care of those blind spots, right? We all have them, and I have mine when it comes to race. And in realizing that, you have to look for opportunities to adjust your mirrors, which means adjusting the way you see things. And that comes through not just your own experience, but your own interaction, making the conscious choice to have these conversations and interact with people who are not like you, who can help you adjust your vision to see things in a different way that would be helpful not only to you, but to those around you.
Ashley, when it comes to race, I admit...
I have a cheat sheet. I wrote down 3 answers to this. So when it comes to race, when it comes to issues of race, I admit I still have a lot to learn, which is really on par with what Crystal was saying. I know for me, the learning is even trying to learn more on a global scale. Like I kind of recommended a book to you recently that was written by a Black writer in Britain, and just I don't really have much of a grasp of the Black experience outside of America. So I really wanted to get more knowledge on just globally how racism and things like that have affected the world. I also wrote down, when it comes to issues of race, I admit we haven't come as far as I'd hoped / thought, because I know I was definitely someone who thought that when Barack Obama was elected president of the United States of America, that was really a turning point in history. It was going to be a momentum shift that was going to continue, and I really have been crushed by the last few months / year, you could say, of what I've been seeing, and it really has reminded me that there's still a lot left to do. So that was my last one, was when it comes to issues of race, I admit we still have a lot of work left to do. So.
Well, thank you very much, panelists, and thank you for listening, Podcast Village. Until next time, see ya.